Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
The fired nurse was looking for any job. When she came to the fading millionaire as per the announcement, she noticed something strange. And after installing the camera, Carla Bosquez left Benedicto Durazo's room feeling a heavy weight on her soul. What she had done was wrong. Carla would never have taken this step if not for her suspicions. She had to find out what was going on after all. Perhaps it was even a matter of life and death. In her early childhood, Carla lived with her mom in a small apartment in a two-story wooden house. They had no father or any other relatives. Just her mom and herself. Carla's mom had grown up in an orphanage, received a government apartment after graduation, trained as a seamstress, and worked most of her life at the local weaving factory. Luckily, the industrial zone where this enterprise was located wasn't far from their home. They didn't even have to spend money on the bus, which was very convenient. Carla and her mom lived very modestly. Carla remembered her early childhood as the happiest time of her life. Her mom was young, cheerful, her smile could make all of Carla's worries disappear. Her mom worked a lot, sometimes even night shifts at the factory. Since she was 5, Carla could take care of herself, cook soup, tidy up, go to the store if needed. Most of Carla's friends lived similarly independent. Always carrying her key, money for bread on the table, what else could they do? Parents work, kids take care of themselves. But how happy Carla was when her mom finally came home, sometimes not empty-handed, bringing something tasty. They would sit in the kitchen, drink coffee, exchange news. It was wonderful. Carla considered her mom a beauty, fair-skinned, with blonde hair, tall, and regretted not taking after her. Carla herself was slender, tan-skinned, with dark eyes, not as striking as her mother. Carla was proud of her beautiful mom. But in the end, this beauty became Carla's source of unhappiness. Tobias Cano, her stepfather, initially courted her mom, showered her with compliments, gallantly offered his hand, gave her flowers, invited her to the movies or cafes. Sometimes Carla and her mom went along. Tobias seemed so cheerful, so kind and caring. At first, Carla liked him. They sometimes talked with her mom about Tobias. Carla was already 11 then, understanding a lot, so her mom consulted her almost as an equal. "Daughter, he's hinting about marriage. What do you think, should I?" At that moment, Carla was sure that yes, it was worth it. Tobias would take care of them, be their support and protection. Carla had a good life with her mom, but she really missed having a father. She envied her friends who had dads. Tobias worked as a driver at the factory where Carla's mom worked. He was handsome, strong, cheerful, the life of the party, with lots of friends and acquaintances, a joker and a prankster. Tobias lived in his own one-bedroom apartment in a much more prosperous neighborhood than where Carla and her mom's wooden house was located. So, after the wedding, they decided to move there. There are better schools there, and all sorts of clubs nearby, her mom listed. Plus, our apartment is so old, it's been needing repairs for a long time, but Tobias's place is spacious, bright, beautiful. And so Carla and her mom ended up in Tobias's apartment. Tobias specially converted the balcony into a separate room for his stepdaughter, insulated it, wallpapered it, and bought furniture. Carla was thrilled to have her own bedroom now. It was small, tiny even, but it was hers. Later, Tobias persuaded her mom to sell her apartment. At first, she resisted, afraid to lose her community and yard, but he described so persuasively the advantages of living in a spacious two-bedroom apartment, even a three-room one, and presented many arguments. The plans for a second child were decisive. After all, how could they live in a one-bedroom with 4 people? Her mom agreed. She sold the apartment and gave Tobias the money. He also put his own apartment up for sale. As a result, the family moved to a spacious two-bedroom apartment. And Carla had a real bedroom, which made the girl incredibly happy. Initially, Carla was happy with all these changes. Tobias had made her and her mom's life better, brighter, fuller. Now they lived in a nice apartment, often visited their parents. It was fun, noisy, joyful. Carla transferred to a new school where she quickly made friends. The first couple of years were almost perfect, almost because Tobias had a temper. They often quarreled with her mom over seemingly insignificant reasons. Tobias was jealous of his wife. He was also irritated by what he called her lack of housekeeping skills. It was hard for Carla to hear criticisms of her mom. But her mom assured her that everything was fine. Tobias loved them very much. He did a lot for them, and arguments were normal in a family. And then Tobias started having problems with drinking. He used to drink before. Every weekend, guests would come over to him, and of course, alcohol was always involved. Carla's mom also participated in these gatherings, and it seemed to Carla that she enjoyed the parties. But then Tobias started drinking in the evenings after work, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. Carla's mom worried because she knew Tobias would have to drive in the morning, which could be dangerous. Tobias was infuriated by his wife's complaints and lectures. He snapped back and said very hurtful things. "I took you with a child, settled you in normal conditions, support you. Your salary is peanuts. And you're here making demands of me. Get out of my sight." Tobias said all this loudly and rudely. If her mom started arguing with him, a real scandal would erupt. And then Carla would lock herself in her room and cover her ears. She was scared and uncomfortable, and also very upset for her mom. Over the years, Tobias drank more and more. He lost his job, and now Carla's mom was the sole provider for the family. But somehow, Tobias still saw himself as a benefactor who had taken in a woman with a child. Tobias had more and more complaints about his wife. She couldn't cook, there was dirt in his apartment, she didn't take care of the child, and most painful for Tobias, she hadn't given birth to a son for him. "You're good for nothing, woman. Couldn't even give me a second child," he lamented. "If I had my Roberto now, I'd have something to live for, to strive for." Tobias also nitpicked at Carla. She dressed like a wild girl, didn't study well, didn't have the right friends, and didn't help much around the house. Once, Carla had been glad that Tobias would become her stepfather. She hoped for friendship, support, warm relations, but he never accepted her. Moreover, Tobias openly irritated her. He often reprimanded his wife for spoiling her daughter too much and spending too much of the family's money on her. Tobias's drunken outbursts drained the soul, sapped their energy and strength. It seemed he hated his wife and stepdaughter. At least, when he was drunk, he poured out a stream of insults that left them feeling gray and sick inside. Unwarranted reproaches, hurtful name-calling. At night, Tobias wouldn't let his wife and daughter sleep. He would talk emotionally on the phone for a long time. He'd turn the TV on loud. He didn't care that Carla had to go to school in the morning and her mother to work. Tobias hadn't worked anywhere for a long time himself. What responsible employer would want an alcoholic like him? He could sleep peacefully until noon, and the problems of his loved ones didn't concern him at all. Carla often pleaded with her mom to divorce Tobias, but it seemed she still loved him. Besides, where could they go? They no longer had their own apartment. Tobias, as later revealed, had put it under his name. Now he claimed sole ownership of the living space, which he frequently mentioned during his drunken speeches. "You're nobody here. Nobody, do you understand? So don't act special. Push me too far, and I'll kick you out." Carla lived in constant fear. She feared that Tobias would actually throw them out one day. She also feared that her stepfather might start a fire while everyone slept. In his drunken state, he was capable of it. Carla was afraid of Tobias's friends too, who regularly visited and year by year became more marginal and unpleasant. Who else would associate with an unemployed drunkard? But most of all, Carla worried about her mom, who was feeling worse and worse. Her mom often had headaches and high blood pressure. She took pills, but doctors mainly recommended a calm lifestyle, free from stress. Yet here was Tobias, with his insults, threats, reproaches, and disgraceful behavior, making Carla's mother's life unbearable. There was also poverty and the need to work multiple shifts. How could she avoid stress in such conditions? Sometimes her mother felt so bad that she would lie down on the couch, clutching her temples and quietly moaning. In those moments, Carla froze with horror. Sometimes she even called an ambulance. Doctors recommended hospital treatment, but how could her mom leave Carla alone? Leave their apartment? In her absence, their home could turn into a real disaster. And Carla? How would she manage without her? Carla finished 9 grades of school and easily entered medical college. It was tough, but Carla had long understood that her only path to a free, independent life was through persistent study. That was the only way to achieve something in life. So, Carla dedicated all her time to studying, and it paid off. She managed to break into the medical field. After completing her required years of study, she landed a job at a private clinic. They paid well there, and Carla even started saving up for future housing. Why not? In a couple of years, she could get a mortgage. By then, she'd have saved up enough for a down payment. Carla's plans were grand. Life seemed pleasant, carefully planned out for many years ahead. But everything was shattered by a terrible tragedy. Carla's mom left for work that morning as usual. She kissed Carla goodbye and wished her a good day. Carla replied in kind to her mom. In the living room, Tobias lay snoring on the floor, clearly still drunk. Carla whispered to her mom she didn't want to wake him. "I wish I could sneak off to work before he wakes up." By noon, Carla received a phone call. It was Viviana Acebo, one of her mom's colleagues whom Carla knew well. "Your mom isn't feeling well," Viviana said with a worried voice. They took her to the hospital. Teresa went with her. Carla's heart sank at that moment. Viviana said her mom was in the hospital. There was no talk of anything fatal, but Carla sensed deep down that she wouldn't see her mom again. And that turned out to be true. When Carla rushed to the hospital, Teresa met her, tears streaming down her face. From Teresa's expression, Carla understood the worst had happened. They couldn't save her mom, it was a stroke. The rest was a blur: the funeral, which her mom's colleagues helped organize, endless condolences, Tobias, who barely understood anything. Carla didn't particularly think about the future then. She tried to grasp what had happened, but her mind refused to accept the information. In the evening, after the memorial service, Carla and Tobias were left alone. Some friends had come over with a bottle, under the respectable, even noble pretext of supporting a friend who had lost his wife. Tobias quickly passed out, falling asleep right on the kitchen floor. His friends continued without him. Carla lay in her bed clutching her mom's blouse, which still carried her scent. Tears streamed down her cheeks. One of Tobias's friends quietly sneaked into her room, sitting on the edge of her bed. Carla looked at him with surprise. His face was flushed, his eyes watery, a stupid grin on his lips. "You're a beauty," he slurred, eyeing Carla. It was a sleazy, unpleasant look that seemed to leave a residue on her skin. It made her want to scrub herself clean immediately. A dirty, unsettling gaze. Carla asked the man to leave, but he instead moved closer, then wrapped his thick, sweaty arms around her tightly. Carla realized she needed to escape. Where did she find the strength? She pushed the drunken man away and bolted for the exit. He lunged after her, but fortunately, his legs couldn't support him well enough. "Where are you going, silly? What are you afraid of? I won't hurt you, quite the opposite." Carla dashed out onto the street. She hadn't managed to change into her nightwear, lacking the strength on that dreadful evening. Fleeing from the apartment, she grabbed her backpack from the nightstand. Good, there was some cash, her documents. Carla called a friend, explaining the situation. She had seen Constantia Salguero recently, at the funeral. Constantia had come to support Carla. "Come to my place, you can stay overnight," Constantia confidently offered. Carla breathed a sigh of relief. At least she had somewhere to go now. She would figure out what to do next from there. At Constantia's place, Carla calmed down a bit, regained her composure, and realized she couldn't set foot in that apartment again. No, she would go back one more time to collect her things, and that would be it. But she would do it later, when the fear had subsided. Living with Tobias was impossible. He drank, became increasingly aggressive and bizarre. His awful friends visited him, and staying there was simply dangerous. Carla had some savings, money she had been putting aside for a down payment on a mortgage. With those funds, she rented an apartment. Constantia helped her find suitable housing. And then life somehow started to improve. Work, a rented apartment, girlfriends, weekend outings to the movies or cafes. Carla even liked her new life. No more jumping at night from the sound of stepfather bringing someone home. No more enduring Tobias's insults, seeing his face contorted with hatred. By the way, he reacted quite calmly to Carla moving out. About time, he commented, watching his stepdaughter hastily pack her things. You're grown up now, not a little girl anymore. You won't disappear. Just don't forget who raised you, taught you. Help me out sometimes, check in. Chip in a bit. Naturally, Carla didn't visit Tobias and certainly didn't provide any financial support. He had turned her life into a hell. In his final years, he lived off his wife's money, the same woman he had driven to a stroke. No, Carla had no intention of having anything to do with this person. She wanted to forget he existed altogether. But how could she forget something like that? Carla deeply missed her mom. Finding herself in a separate, albeit rented apartment, she began to question things. Why hadn't she done this earlier? After all, there were funds for rent. Perhaps her mom would still be alive. Tobias's behavior had become a constant, unrelenting stress for her. It likely triggered the stroke. Unfortunately, the past couldn't be changed. The private clinic where Carla worked as a nurse gradually expanded and turned into a full-fledged medical center. Luxurious renovations, stylish interiors, state-of-the-art medical equipment, renowned doctors, everything was in place. The owner of the business wasn't particularly knowledgeable about medicine but did a lot for his creation. The staff were paid quite well by city standards. It was enough for Carla to cover her rent, enjoy good food, and even afford nice but not overly expensive clothing. Then something happened, and Carla didn't quite understand what exactly. In short, the former owner went bankrupt or got into some debt trouble. Either way, he had to part ways with the medical center and sell the business. The clinic passed into the hands of a new owner. Among the staff, anxious rumors began to circulate. The new broom sweeps differently. Senior nurse Malia Ostudio, an elderly woman, shook her head knowingly. They might just ask us all to leave. Oh, I'm so scared, Carla fretted. Well, you, young and beautiful, shouldn't worry too much, I guess. But me, a pensioner, they'll surely lay me off. Who needs elderly employees anyway? Carla hoped Malia was wrong because she couldn't afford to lose a good income. After all, she had no one else to rely on. She had to rely on herself. Unfortunately, Malia's prediction did come true, albeit not entirely. The new owner indeed started laying off the previous staff members, and Carla was also included in the layoffs, despite being young, attractive, and performing well. It was a blow and a complete surprise to her. She had really hoped to keep her job. Carla began scouring job listings. Nothing offered seemed suitable to her. The average nurse's salary in their city was simply laughable. Only private clinics paid well. Working in a public hospital wouldn't even cover rent, let alone food for a month, even with Carla's modest needs. She was nearing desperation. On top of it all, the rent was due soon, and she had no money left at all. The landlord had given her a couple of weeks. Just a couple of weeks, and she would find herself on the streets. Constantia, the same friend who had sheltered Carla a few years ago, stepped in to help. But why are you fixated on being a nurse? Constantia asked. What else can I do? Carla shrugged. With your education, there are plenty of other job opportunities, Constantia replied. Like what? Well, for example, Constantia pulled out a folded newspaper from her purse. Carla hadn't seen a real newspaper in ages. This one was filled with classified ads. What's this? I looked up caregiving vacancies, Constantia explained, and even circled a few ads that might interest you. Take a close look. I think you'll find something. Carla took the newspaper from her friend's hands and quickly scanned the circled ads. They were all caregiver positions that welcomed medical education. Carla smiled, wondering why she hadn't thought of this herself. The very next day, Carla started calling potential employers. Some had already found caregivers for their sick relatives, others offered unacceptably low pay, and a few required a male assistant because the person needed help being lifted into the bath. Carla was almost despairing when finally she found a suitable option and was invited for an interview. A couple of hours later, following that encouraging phone call, Carla stood before the gates of a magnificent mansion. Clearly, a very wealthy family lived here. Carla even blushed at the thought. They wouldn't hire someone like her, just a simple girl. A woman in a strict blue dress and an impassive face greeted her. She escorted Carla into the house. Carla's head spun. Such spaciousness, such luxury. She had only seen interiors like this in TV shows about the lives of the rich. Please have a seat, the woman in the blue dress said, and Carla sank into a soft couch. Soon, a man around 50 descended the wide staircase. He greeted Carla and sat opposite her. His gray, attentive eyes scrutinized her. "You're so young," he remarked. "Do you think you can handle it?" "I have experience working with complex patients. I spent several years as a nurse in a hospital and..." From there, the conversation shifted to a more formal tone. The man with gray eyes was interested in Carla's education, her experience, her skills. Carla answered honestly and directly. Judging by the interviewer's expression, her responses seemed satisfactory to him. "Well then, it seems you're a good fit for us. Do you have any questions?" Of course, Carla did. She already knew roughly what her potential salary would be. They had mentioned it over the phone, and the amount was more than satisfactory. The salary offered was even higher than Carla's earnings at the hospital. But Carla was very curious about her ward. "Benedicto Durazo hardly gets out of bed," the man began to explain. "He has a serious diagnosis. Nothing can be done, even with his connections and money. He's slowly fading, losing strength. He needs someone to assist him throughout the day. To administer medication, adjust pillows, listen, entertain with stories. I see you're an open, simple, kind girl. That's exactly what we need. Your medical education is simply wonderful. Benedicto sometimes needs injections. Can you handle that?" "Of course," Carla replied immediately. Then the man with the gray, attentive eyes introduced her to the employer. Benedicto lay in a spacious, bright bedroom. There was a faint smell of medication in the room, but overall, the air was fresh and cool. Typically, in the rooms of seriously ill patients, the aroma was quite different. Heavy and repellent, but here there was nothing of the kind. Carla liked that a lot. Benedicto himself was a thin, pale man. Dark, short-cropped hair, brown, almost black, intelligent eyes. "Here, Benedicto, I found you a daytime caregiver." "Hello," Carla greeted him. Benedicto looked at her with a warm, friendly gaze. He even managed to muster a smile. "Hello, beautiful creature. I'll try to give you as little trouble as possible." Carla was surprised. She had prepared herself to serve a demanding person who would expect the impossible from her and criticize her at every opportunity. And she was ready to endure it all for the money. She felt there was no other way. But then came these words. Although, maybe this Benedicto would prove himself yet. But Benedicto turned out to be a genuinely pleasant person. Tactful, intelligent, respectful. He conducted himself impeccably politely with the household staff, of which there were plenty in his home. He never offended anyone with their salary. These people reciprocated the employer's attitude, loving and respecting him. Benedicto was aware of the problems his subordinates faced. For instance, he helped the maid Marta's son get expensive medicine and arranged for the gardener's mother to be admitted to the hospital, paid for the cook's daughter to go to camp, and found a clinic for the manager's son, the same man with gray eyes who greeted Carla on her first day in this house. The young man was suffering from addiction and was literally on the brink. Benedicto gave him a chance at a happy life. This man had money and connections, and he used his potential to make others happy. Carla and Benedicto quickly became friends. Learning about the young caregiver's story, the man felt a deep respect for her. "You're a strong girl," he said. "Others in your place would have broken down." "How many are like that? They start drinking, partying, wasting their lives, but you endured. You have a backbone." Carla was pleased with this compliment. Carla and Benedicto spent a lot of time together. The man was mostly bedridden, rarely getting up, and he often needed assistance. His sociable nature couldn't tolerate loneliness. Despite his advanced age and illness that showed him no mercy, he still loved conversations as he used to and preferred being in the company of others. There was always someone visiting him, former colleagues, friends, or relatives. The staff was constantly bustling in his room. Carla also befriended the kind and friendly Emmanuel Enriquez. From the doctor who visited almost every day, Carla learned Benedicto's diagnosis. Yes, it indeed left no chance for recovery. It was unfair and heartbreaking. Such a good person, not even old yet. So much warmth and kindness emanated from him. Everyone around him felt good, calm, and pleasant, despite his fate. Carla spoke extensively with Benedicto, and the other household aides shared stories about him, speaking only the best. That's the kind of person he was. It turns out Benedicto came from a poor rural family. From childhood, he showed talents in various fields, so after finishing the village school, he came to the city to study. He enrolled in a prestigious faculty that prepared aviation engineers. While studying, he worked part-time in a design bureau. The idea to start his own furniture manufacturing company came to him during this time. After graduating from university, Benedicto found a job at a factory but never forgot about his dream. He saved money, built connections, and gathered information. Finally, the happy moment arrived. Benedicto founded a company specializing in furniture repair and custom-made cabinets and tables. Initially, it was tough. Benedicto consistently operated at a loss, and his savings quickly dwindled. He was about to give up hope when luck struck. The fledgling company secured its first major order, which its employees executed flawlessly. From there, everything started to fall into place. The significant client provided them with excellent publicity in the right circles, and orders poured in abundantly. The company grew, strengthened, and developed. Soon, it became a fully fledged large corporation with corresponding profits. Around that time, Benedicto was dating a girl he had been fond of since university, Amalia Valena. They had first met at a student disco. Benedicto immediately realized he was in love. As for Amalia, she had her doubts. She was a prominent and beautiful girl with thick, honey-toned hair, large blue eyes, and a stunning figure. Many pursued her back then. The abundance of choices bewildered her. While Amalia liked Benedicto, kind, reliable, genuine, she desired a more glamorous life. She believed her external attributes deserved that. Benedicto wasn't wealthy. Then fate brought them together again when Benedicto's business began to thrive. Both concluded their meeting wasn't coincidental, and they became a couple. Now, Benedicto felt genuinely happy. He had money, his beloved business, and Amalia by his side, gentle, loving, understanding. By that time, she could fully appreciate Benedicto's human qualities, having stumbled a few times and understanding what mattered. Soon, Benedicto could afford a huge house in an elite gated community. They had planned for children to fill this house very soon, with enough space for more than one child. Benedicto and Amalia dreamed of becoming parents to many children. However, those plans never came to fruition. Year after year passed, but the long-awaited child never appeared. One day, in tears, Amalia confessed to her husband that several years ago she had undergone an abortion by some scoundrel. She cried, blamed herself, even suggested Benedicto leave her and find a normal wife without such a past. Of course, he never entertained such thoughts. Long years of visiting doctors commenced, but nothing helped. Neither experimental drugs, nor expensive injections, nor innovative methods. Benedicto, at least he had his business, his furniture company. Work consumed much of his time, requiring his full engagement. So, he had something to occupy himself with. But Amalia, she transformed from a cheerful and tender wife into a suffering soul, blaming everyone and anyone for her misfortune or lack of empathy towards her. Amalia became fixated on the unattainable dream of motherhood. She suffered, felt out of place, and grew resentful towards her husband for spending so much time at work and not suffering enough with her. Benedicto suggested that if Amalia wanted a child so badly, why not get involved in volunteer work? These people visit orphanages, helping orphans. He even took a couple of shelters under his wing, becoming a constant sponsor for disadvantaged children. The plan was for Amalia to visit orphanages, find out what the children needed, and handle the procurement of necessities. Initially, Amalia embraced this idea with enthusiasm, but her enthusiasm didn't last long. Other people's sniffling children, often poorly behaved, noisy, or even sick, repulsed her. She didn't want to see them. So, Amalia quickly distanced herself and immersed herself once again in her suffering over her own child. And Benedicto? He continued to help orphanages, but now alone. He enjoyed seeing the gratitude of the staff, feeling that he was making the destitute orphans a little happier. After all, strength and opportunities are given to support those who are weaker. During that period, Amalia and Benedicto grew very distant from each other. They didn't understand each other, often argued. Amalia accused Benedicto of being inattentive, of being cold, though these were wholly unfair accusations. Benedicto missed the old Amalia so much, their soulful conversations, the warmth and tenderness that had once been between them. And then she entered his life. A young woman, modest, quiet, incredibly beautiful and touching. And very, very sincere. That's what finally won Benedicto over completely. Such people were rare for him. Camila Barra worked as a weaver. Benedicto had a long-term contract with the factory where she worked, supplying fabric for upholstering sofas. One day, Benedicto went to the factory director for business matters, and in the corridor, he accidentally bumped into her. She was also heading to the director, carrying a leave application. It was like a lightning strike. At first glance, the girl didn't stand out in any special way. Minimal makeup, a modest dress that didn't hide the advantages of her graceful figure, but Benedicto couldn't tear himself away from her eyes, radiant, gentle, captivating. In general, he gathered the courage and introduced himself to her, learned her name, and engaged in some casual conversation. Benedicto felt warmth and sympathy from Camila, and they enjoyed each other's company so much. Benedicto acted unfairly by hiding from Camila that he was married. Otherwise, she would never have agreed to date him. As for Benedicto, at that moment, he didn't even think about the future. After all, the truth would eventually come out. He wasn't worried about Amalia's feelings, he felt they had long been strangers. With Camila, however, everything was different. She enveloped Benedicto with care like a warm blanket. In return, he did what he could to take care of her, buying her beautiful clothes and providing moral support. He even helped arrange for her boss to increase her salary. Expensive gifts embarrassed Camila, but Benedicto's care clearly brought her pleasure. She had a complex fate. Raised in an orphanage, she didn't know the love of close people. And now she gratefully accepted Benedicto's attention. By the time Benedicto finally confessed to Camila that he was married, they had been dating for a couple of months. The pain and despair reflected in her beautiful blue eyes were palpable. She looked at Benedicto as if he had deeply disappointed her. "We've been strangers with my wife for a long time. She doesn't understand me, and I don't understand her. We will divorce," Benedicto said, realizing how cliched his words sounded, typical excuses of a philandering married man. Camila walked away from him. And it wasn't because Benedicto turned out to be married, no. It was the fact that he had deceived her for so long. Benedicto didn't know where Camila lived, but he would wait for her in the evenings by the gates of the weaving factory. He confessed his love and begged her to come back. One day, Camila firmly asked him not to bother her anymore. "I've found a young man who is honest with me and not married. We are serious, so please don't interfere." Camila's gaze was cold, her voice stern. Benedicto probably wouldn't have given up on her, but suddenly it turned out that Amalia was expecting a baby. The long-awaited event that almost no one dared to hope for. Another round of IVF at the Capitol Clinic produced this result. Amalia, she was like flying around the house on wings. Her endless reproaches and ceaseless suffering disappeared. The woman's eyes now sparkled with happiness. And Amalia needed protection and the support of her husband. So Benedicto decided to stay with Camila. After all, a child was about to be born. This little one needed a father. His heart was aching. Some inner feeling told him that he was missing something very important. Something that could never be regained or replaced. Benedicto longed for Camila's touch, her eyes, but new circumstances dictated his course of action. Benedicto stayed with his family. Amelia's pregnancy was difficult. She was constantly in and out of the hospital for monitoring. Both spouses were constantly anxious about the future of their baby. Would they be able to carry him to full term? After all, they were unlikely to have another chance to become parents. Mariano was born prematurely but perfectly viable. The baby had to spend a couple of months in the hospital. And then, there was a triumphant discharge with lots of guests, entertainers, a huge cake, and baskets of flowers. Amalia felt genuinely happy. Benedicto saw this and rejoiced for his wife. He himself was proud to have become a father. He had a son, a future assistant in all matters, the heir to the furniture company, his best friend. His new role and the emotions tied to it almost completely pushed thoughts of Camila out of Benedicto's mind. And then there was a lot of work piled up. Only occasionally did he see her beautiful blue eyes in his dreams, clear and transparent like mountain lakes. And then his heart ached with longing for her. Benedicto sometimes visited the factory where Camila worked for work-related matters. He looked around carefully, hoping to see her, but she was nowhere to be found. Maybe she had quit? But he didn't want to inquire specifically about her. It was better to erase Camila from his mind altogether. He now had a son. And what about her? She had a young man. She had told him that herself, so. What was the point of these yearnings? "I'm telling you this story for a reason," Benedicto smiled at the silent Carla. "You see, if you ever find true love, real love, never trade it for anything, fight for it until the end. Only then, in the twilight of your years, will you understand that you've done everything right in this life. There's always a way to make everything work, to not miss out on your happiness and not leave others unhappy. You're probably still young. You may not understand what I mean." Carla may not have fully understood her wise employer, but she felt his longing for Camila. Imagine, they were together for only 2 months, and he remembers her his whole life. And even now, being seriously ill, he regrets letting her go back then. That's the feeling. Carla suddenly realized that she dreams of loving someone just as deeply someday. Little Mariano, the light in the window for his long-awaited parents. A marvelous miracle, the heir prince. Needless to say, the baby was spoiled. He was showered with expensive toys, enveloped in care by both mother and father, who seemed to live for this charming boy. Benedicto had big plans for his son. He envisioned him as intelligent, strong, assertive yet kind and compassionate. But as Mariano grew up, as often happens, he turned out quite differently from what his parents had imagined. Spoiled, capricious, selfish, Benedicto sadly shook his head as he uttered these epithets about his only son. I'm to blame, I'm to blame. I worked too much, convinced myself it was all for him. For Mariano's future. I wanted to leave him an empire to further develop and strengthen. But where did it all go wrong? At first, everything was great. Amalia eagerly took on the task of developing her little one, baby swimming pool, English and speed reading courses for preschoolers, mental math, preparation for the most prestigious high school in the city with the help of university professors. Though Benedicto had to pull strings here. On his own, despite the efforts of tutors, Mariano did not meet the passing grade. Then, the influential father often had to use his power and influence to support his son. He didn't like it. It seemed like he was doing something wrong, but Amalia convinced him each time that he had to promote their only offspring by any means necessary. Amalia doted on Mariano. All mothers love their children. But in Amalia's case, it turned into something almost pathological. She forgave him for everything, organized his daily life and leisure so that he wouldn't encounter difficulties and consequently wouldn't get upset unnecessarily. Mariano took failures so painfully, cried, suffered. His head would ache for a long time afterward. Of course, under such conditions, the boy couldn't grow up any differently. From childhood, he believed the whole world revolved around him. He knew that if he just complained to his mother, put on a sad face, or perhaps shed a tear, she would do everything he needed. Benedicto, of course, was not satisfied with such parenting methods. He tried to argue with his wife, but, "You don't know how to raise children. I've read heaps of literature. This is how free-spirited, self-assured, and happy individuals are raised. You have no idea how much childhood trauma we all have. It hinders us in life, clips our wings." Mariano won't experience that. If Benedicto continued to insist, Amalia would use ironclad arguments. "And you're always at work. You're hardly ever home. You don't take a particular interest in the child. You don't know what he lives and breathes." At this point, Benedicto fell silent, gave in, because Amalia was indeed right. Yes, he spent a lot of time at work and had no idea how to raise children. In this matter, his wife certainly knew better. When it came time to apply to university, it turned out that Mariano's knowledge might not even meet the minimum score required for admission to a fee-paying program. This was despite the fact that the boy attended a prestigious high school. Mariano always had good grades, so Benedicto was quite surprised by this result. He had thought his son was knowledgeable. Yes, Mariano was infantile, dependent, capricious, but diligent in his studies and intelligent. It turned out that for many years, Amalia had been handling her son's education her own way. Simply put, she bribed the principal, and Mariano received good grades. Benedicto was beside himself. By this point, he finally realized what a mistake it was to neglect his son's upbringing. Connections had to be called upon again. Mariano became a student at the local university's design faculty. He chose the field himself. However, the young man aimed to move to the capital, but Benedicto understood that his ill-equipped offspring needed to be under constant parental control. Moreover, even in the capital's universities, an influential father couldn't cover for him. Benedicto's capabilities were not limitless. And life in this city was much simpler. Mariano studied at the university for a few months and disappeared, along with a substantial sum of money from the safe. Amalia was beside herself at the time. She walked around in a daze, constantly taking sedatives. As for Benedicto, he was almost relieved. At last, his son had made a decisive and bold move. He must have set off to pursue his dream in the capital. Even if things didn't work out, it wasn't the end of the world. The impulse itself was right. Later it turned out that Mariano did indeed move to the capital. He didn't study or work there. Instead, he was searching for himself. Simply put, he was burning through his father's money and surfing the internet looking for design courses. He would start one course after another and promptly drop out, even those that had already been paid for. The reason was that he found them either boring or too difficult. When the money ran out, that's when Mariano would reappear. He would call, asking for a transfer. Naturally, Amalia fulfilled her son's request. She was prepared to do anything to maintain his favor. Benedicto, if he had been asked, would have handled it differently. He wouldn't have given money to his audacious offspring. Either Mariano would have returned home with his tail between his legs or started to fend for himself. But arguing with Amalia about Mariano was futile. And what if he ends up starving or turns to crime because he doesn't have money? He'll ruin his reputation. How will we live, knowing that we are to blame because we didn't help our own flesh and blood in a difficult moment? Mariano remained in the capital, fully supported by his father. He would only call his parents when he ran out of money. He would briefly mention his life reluctantly and superficially, as if considering such conversations a heavy burden. Mariano tried himself in various fields. He worked as a model because of his pleasant appearance and self-confidence, played in a rock band, attempted to start his own business with his father's money, and took his first steps in psychology, but nothing worked out for him anywhere. And Benedicto understood perfectly why. Mariano wasn't used to working, wasn't accustomed to labor. The boy had grown up in sheltered conditions. Mariano had no idea how to overcome difficulties. He enjoyed an easy, pleasant, carefree life, and he lived it. Nightclubs, beautiful girls, young men eager for a young man's money, more precisely, his father's money. But for the girls, there was no particular difference. Cheerful comrades, those who liked to live at someone else's expense. Mariano caught the attention of the police a couple of times. These were stories related to substances and robbery. Benedicto managed to pull Mariano out of trouble each time. However, this cost him considerable stress, effort, and money. Then Amalia fell ill. Benedicto suspected that nerves were to blame for everything. His wife was deeply concerned about their son, the wastrel. She dreamed that Mariano would marry, become a model family man, and his father's successor, his right hand. She planned to become a grandmother with many grandchildren. That's what she called herself jokingly, though she added the adjective future. Heart complications began to progress, a condition hidden since birth. Amalia was aware of her defect, but it had remained dormant throughout her life. Now it had surfaced. Amalia's health rapidly declined. She was constantly in hospitals, undergoing several operations. During one of them, her weakened body couldn't withstand the procedure. Benedicto felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. All these years, he knew he had her, loving, understanding, reliable, in need of his protection and care, yet also giving him strength and motivation to conquer new heights. After his wife's passing, Benedicto felt complete loneliness. Mariano came to bid farewell. Yes, Benedicto still had his son, but he had grown into a completely different person. Benedicto didn't even know what to talk to him about or how to support him in their shared grief. Amalia's death also shook Mariano. She had been the closest person to him. The young man looked lost. Benedicto couldn't help but feel sorry for him. For the first time, he saw his son as weak and uncertain. However, Mariano quickly regained composure and departed for the capital. He found his hometown too boring and confining. Requests for money transfers continued, but now Mariano approached his father directly. Sometimes he didn't even express gratitude, believing that it was all as it should be. Benedicto transferred the sums his son requested, perhaps now in memory of Amalia. Years passed, and nothing changed. Mariano continued to live a frivolous life in the capital. He had become a father himself, but he didn't live with or communicate with the mother of his child. Mariano was registered as unemployed, making it impossible to collect child support from him. The woman didn't even acknowledge Mariano as the father. Benedicto dearly wished to see his grandson, to somehow be part of his life. But he had learned about the existence of this child by chance and had no idea where to find him. Mariano, of course, denied everything. To all inquiries, he replied that it was his personal business and his father shouldn't meddle in it. And then Benedicto fell ill himself. The diagnosis was grim, but he fought. He remained on his feet for a long time despite the doctor's more pessimistic forecasts. Yet, the illness took its toll, laying low the strong man. Mariano occasionally visited his father from the capital. They had their own affairs, mutually beneficial cooperation. Carla nodded. Yes, she was acquainted with Mariano. He did indeed visit his old man once or twice a month. Handsome, polished in some way, stylish, expensively dressed, with a strong chin, sharp cheekbones, and arched eyebrows. A typical TV show heartthrob. It's no wonder he had many girlfriends. People always noticed such individuals. Carla noticed something that kept bothering her. That's why she took a step that wasn't entirely morally correct. But she needed to verify her suspicions. During the time she spent in Benedicto's beautiful home, Carla had become familiar with him. And Mariano? His visits had a detrimental effect on Benedicto's health and mood. Yes, Benedicto was already bedridden, but he remained lively, open to conversation, cheerful, smiling at the staff, and often meeting with friends. After Mariano's visits, however, he was a different person, his gaze dulled, his face gray, showing complete apathy. Some time would pass, and the old Benedicto would return, until Mariano appeared in his room again. A very strange pattern. Mariano, there was something unpleasant about him. A haughty and disdainful look. The young man looked through people, considering it beneath his dignity to greet them. A repulsive personality, despite his very advantageous appearance. Carla was almost certain that Mariano was poisoning his father. She had recently seen something similar in a TV series. There, the heir deliberately poisoned a relative. Not a father, but an uncle, to inherit his estate sooner. Considering Mariano's appearance and the accounts from Benedicto and the staff, it seemed Mariano was quite capable of such actions. It appeared he was willing to do anything for money. Carla made her decision. She bought an inexpensive camera from an electronics store, watched a few videos online about how to install and operate it, and then chose a moment to leave the camera in Benedicto's bedroom. Carla knew that Mariano would soon visit his father, and she wanted to see for herself, to understand and confirm what was happening. If her suspicions were confirmed, if Mariano was indeed tampering with his father's food or water, she would take it all to the police. Finally, the day arrived. Mariano came to his father. As usual, he passed Carla without even acknowledging her with a glance. She had grown accustomed to such dismissive treatment. But soon, her suspicions would either be confirmed or refuted. Anything was better than complete uncertainty. Carla went to the servant's room. It was empty, so she took out her phone from her pocket, displaying the image from Benedicto's bedroom on the screen. The recording quality was excellent. She could see every detail, hear every sound. This was good. "How are you feeling?" Mariano inquired, settling down by his father's bed. "You look all right." "I'm okay, Mariano." "And you?" "Better than ever." "How's our business progressing?" "Father," Mariano looked at his parent reproachfully, "you know it's all pointless." "But are the detectives still searching?" "They are," Mariano nodded. "You're spending a fortune on them, but even they think it's all a waste of time and money. That girl, your daughter, probably never existed. You invented her. You just made her up." Benedicto shook his head and asked Mariano to fetch a photograph of his daughter. Carla couldn't understand anything. Benedicto only had a son, Mariano. What daughter is he talking about now? Mariano obediently pulled out an A4-sized photograph from a folder and handed it to his father. "She exists," Benedicto said, looking at the picture affectionately, "and she's my daughter. The child of the woman you cheated on your mother with, she died. Maybe she was your daughter, maybe not. Continue the search." You are crazy. Mariano looked at his father with anger, with hatred. You don't want to accept the obvious. I know why you dream of finding this mythical daughter who either died in childhood or never existed at all. You're just disappointed in me and hope she'll turn out better. Benedicto's eyes grew dull and he paled visibly. His son's words caused him physical pain. Carla understood that Mariano wasn't poisoning his father, he was tormenting him with words and bad news. Benedicto, it seemed, was searching for his lost daughter, and Mariano appeared to be assisting him. But this help was backfiring. Father and son talked a bit more. Benedicto promised to transfer a large sum of money to Mariano, part of it for the detectives working on the search, and part to Tobias for his efforts. The search for Benedicto's missing daughter, or rather, its organization and coordination, was now Mariano's responsibility, for which he was being paid. This was what Carla deduced from the conversation between father and son. Mariano left. Only after that did Carla muster the courage to enter Benedicto's room. He seemed either asleep or lost in thought, as usual after Mariano's visits. His complexion was pallid, dark circles under his eyes. Communicating with Mariano drained his last reserves of strength. The boy particularly didn't mince words with his father, sparing no feelings, almost seeming to try to inflict pain. In Benedicto's hands was that very photograph. Mariano had either left it for him or simply forgotten to take it when he left. The photo lay face up. Unable to resist her curiosity, Carla took the picture from sleeping Benedicto's hands and was stunned. In the photograph, she saw a young woman, beautiful and smiling, holding a small child. It was Carla's mother and herself. Dizziness overcame Carla, her vision darkening. Carla hesitated for a long time to broach the subject with Benedicto. Initially, he wasn't feeling well and clearly wasn't prepared for such a shock. Later, Carla simply feared it. Not only was the topic delicate, but she would also have to admit that she had been spying on Benedicto and Mariano, eavesdropping on their conversations, and had seen that photograph. Ultimately, what seemed like someone else's affairs turned out to be Carla's own, after her not-so-tactful intrusion. Fate intervened. Benedicto was scheduled to be transferred to the hospital. It was time for his annual checkup, easier to conduct within the hospital's walls. He would be taken away for at least a month. Carla couldn't delay this important conversation any longer. Carla entered Benedicto's room. In her hands was the photograph, the very same one. It had been in Carla and her mother's family photo album for many years. Carla remembered the picture from her earliest childhood, and it was intriguing to see her mother so young, and herself as a tiny child. Benedicto, I need to talk to you seriously. I have this photograph here. Carla showed the elderly man the same picture, and I know you have the same one. It's strange and surprising. Please, tell me, where did you get this photo? Benedicto's expression changed. He scrutinized Carla's face intently, as if trying to read something from it. It can't be, but it was obvious from the very beginning. Your appearance, are we alike? Could it really be you? Explain it to me, I don't understand. Did you have a daughter? Where did you get this photo? I have the same picture. This photo was sent to me by the most wonderful girl in the world. Perhaps she was the only one I truly loved. It was such an extraordinary feeling, but fate didn't have us stay together, as it turned out. This is Camila. I've told you about her before, remember? Camila, Carla's mother, she was the woman Benedicto had met at the textile factory. They had dated for a few months, and he had fallen head over heels for her. He was making grand plans, knowing it wouldn't be easy, but he intended to part ways with Amalia and propose to the woman who made him feel so happy. But it wasn't meant to be. About a year and a half later, Mariano had already been born and became the center of the universe for Amalia, and also for Benedicto. And then this letter arrived, a letter without a return address. It had a photo in it, the same one you're holding now. Camila and a charming little girl, you. She wrote that she had my daughter and wanted me to know about it. She wanted me to know that our love hadn't dissolved into nothingness, hadn't disappeared. This feeling had a continuation. A wonderful child. Camila also wrote that she was married and living in another city with her husband. She asked me not to look for her. The only thing she wanted was for me to know about your existence. Of course, Benedicto tried to find Camila, he really tried. But she had indeed left the city. Where she went and with whom, she didn't tell anyone. She quit her job, took her daughter, and left. Mom told me that she tried to build a family with someone, and they really left here for a few years, and then Mom broke up with him, and we came back here, Carla said. If only I had known, Benedicto looked at Carla intently. If you are Camila's daughter, it means she's no longer with us. You've told me about your life, I remember everything. Yes, my mom is no longer here. And I had so much I wanted to tell her. Benedicto shook his head sadly, then continued his story. Realizing that insidious disease would soon take him from this world, Benedicto embarked seriously on the search for his daughter. He wanted to find her, this girl, or rather, now a young woman. He wanted to get to know her, talk to her about everything. Of course, he also wanted to talk to Camila. He couldn't have imagined she was no longer around. Benedicto helped other people's children, sponsored orphanages, but his heart was restless about his own unknown daughter. How is she living? Does she need anything? Is anyone mistreating her? I wanted to at least meet her before I die and support her, do something for her. I hired detectives, or rather Mariano did. I told him everything and appointed him as the coordinator of the investigation, so to speak. I wasn't able to do it myself anymore. We managed to find out some things. Supposedly, Camila did indeed have a daughter once, but she passed away. I couldn't believe it. The documents looked fake, as if someone just wanted to cover their tracks. I asked Mariano to continue the investigation, but it didn't yield any results. Lately, bad news has been weighing heavily on me. Time was slipping away, the chances of finding my daughter were diminishing, but fate took pity. You found me yourself. And Mariano. I don't think he was even looking. He was just taking the money I gave him for the detectives. I'm not a fool. I understand he's worried about his inheritance, afraid he'll have to share it with his sister, with you. I don't even know what to say, Carla said, her eyes wide with confusion. What she had just heard didn't make sense in her head, but somewhere deep inside, she felt warmth spreading throughout her body. She had a father, and such a strong, kind, wise, incredible one. There's so much we need to catch up on while we still can, Benedicto warmly smiled at Carla. We'll try our best. And Mariano, he'll come around once he realizes. Can you imagine? Mariano dreamed his whole life about having a sister, specifically a sister. He used to ask us when he was little to have a sister for him. Of course, he stopped later as he grew up. I think Mariano will be glad in the end. Benedicto reached out and squeezed Carla's hand firmly. She smiled. Suddenly, she felt like wings had grown on her back. She wasn't alone anymore, she had a family now.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.